Dr. Jazz. Dr. Jazz.
10 years and or a little bit longer, but like especially the last 10 years, you've been, I think, present in the creative music scene so much. And you know, I first heard about you, like I bought a record of the Convergence Quartet.
Yeah.
And you know, I knew Taylor, and he's amazing, and I was like, wow, who's the piano player? And I started checking you out, you know, and I was like, damn, man, incredible stuff. So
thank you.
I just want to go through some of the stuff you
sure.
did. And what impressed me most, man, was like that you actually didn't study music. It's kind of the same like me.
Okay.
And I really want to hear about that point of view, because I think that's in creative music quite important in a way. Well, not quite, at least for me. Anyway.
Well, no, it's an interesting question, I think. I mean, it's true to say that. I mean, I definitely didn't study music officially, you know, at a college and stuff.
Yeah,
you know, I suppose where I was really lucky is when I was very young. I had very good teachers. I suppose I grew up playing classical music, so I had really good teachers who sort of taught me the disciplines of practicing and you know, it's like people give you, like, a really good teacher will always give you the key. They won't spoon feed you the information. They show you how to learn.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's absolutely true that I didn't learn formally, but I always, that's because I was so lucky to be taught really well early on. But yeah, I agree. I think it's a really interesting issue. And then there are all these issues of, for example, jazz education versus other types of discipline. I mean, for example, jazz education in the UK is generally, and I think, to be fair, it's changing a little bit in some places, is generally very conservative. And there are all sorts of conceptual problems with teaching kind of creative music. And so yeah, it didn't appeal to me at that time, but I suppose I was privileged in the sense that, you know, I'd had teachers who showed me how to learn, at least in some way, before that period. Yeah.
No, I agree with you. But like, you know, I studied actually languages, and then you know, I did a PhD in American poetry and translation and MA and everything, like academically. And so, but you know, like I went to Klagenfurt in Austria. To accompany a friend who was doing his entrance exams there in the jazz, and they accepted me, you know. So
fantastic.
And I went there like for 6 weeks, and I got bored because, you know, I was really into Ornette and Eric Dolphy, and I was like, ask the teacher, like, okay, man, so what does Dolphy do there? You know, I want to know what's the concept, what's the idea of Ornette, and like, no, first you do these etudes, Joe Pass, and I was like, I love Joe Pass, but you know, I really want to know that. So
that's it. Yeah. No. That's I feel very similarly. I mean, you know, I feel like it's the one, maybe even conservative is the word. The one conservative aspect I have to my music is that, you know, I love Bud Powell so much that I'm going to listen to him play Bud Powell, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, whatever, when I'm sitting practicing, I like to play tunes or whatever, but I love that music so much that I want to listen to that. I don't want to listen to me do that. Now, of course, I understand, you know, the argument that, you know, it gives you a basis for doing other things. I understand that too, but yeah, I completely agree. And like you, I also did a PhD in a different subject. So
I read like criminology.
yeah, it's kind of crazy.
How did that happen?
Well, you know, it was kind of nice because it was really just a genuine. I was just interested in it, and I think part of it was that I was always very determined to try and be able to play music as a job, if you like, for my living. But I think I felt that it was such a privilege to be able to do that, that I wanted to really test myself. I wanted to see how far I could go with really rigorous, you know. And so law was a really nice case study for that, you know, very rigorous, you know, because I like that, you know, having come from sort of classical music, that, you know, the precision and structure and things I love, as well as the chaos too. But so part of it was that I loved the process, and you know, I was interested in it, you know, and I think that maybe that's a problem, a contemporary problem, isn't it? Is that maybe people regard everything as a means to an end.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. Like I tell my students that, you know, you can go study, I don't know, whatever, biology, but you can still be a professional musician later.
Right.
But,
yeah, sure. Yeah.
You know, it's
Which languages did you study?
Well, I first studied English and German,
yeah,
and then I did like an MA in translation, and then American poetry PhD, and I, you know, I just like, but I was at the faculty at the time, and you know, besides making music, and then things kind of changed, and I said like, okay, I'll go 100% into music, and I just finished the PhD for myself because I was interested in it, like you said, you know, and.
Yeah. Wow. Because I mean, because Slovenian is kind of a beautiful language. It's kind of amazing. Yeah. You know,
it's beautiful. Yeah.
The how do you call it? The dual. This idea.
Oh yeah.
You know, but I mean, especially for poetry. I mean, what a brilliant concept. You know, this is a bit of this is a tool that we don't have. You know, this is this is so fantastic. And
yeah, that language is. I mean, you know, it's also a perception. I think. I relate it to jazz in a way, or improvisation, like, because they go hand in hand, I would say, poetry or language in general.
Yeah.
With music, you know, like you said, structure and stuff like that, and destroying the structure. And, you know, it's good to have a different point of view, not just being in music, I think, all the time. I don't know. It's how I felt. So.
No, I think absolutely. I mean, just in the same way that, you know, we're talking about studying jazz, I feel that, you know, when Duke Ellington in the early 20s is innovating, what's he listening to? You know, everything.
Exactly.
Because you can't
Parker or all these guys.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and I remember a very kind of influential thing on. I found it very inspirational early on, was reading an interview with Henry Threadgill where they're talking to him about influences, and I think before he talks about, you know. Does he talk about Coltrane? I can't remember. But first of all, he talks about when he was in the army and was listening to country and western music. And then he talks about listening to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra with Fritz Reiner. And then I'm thinking, well, actually, this is it. You know, this sort of transcending labels is so important. And absolutely. Yeah,
but it's like, you know, I will not dig further into it. I mean, you know, I love that musicians can actually and make a living because it's important through teaching. But from the student point of view, many times you get this idea of clones, you know, like 20 guitarists sound almost the same and they're not recognizable. And, you know, I think in jazz nowadays, or creative music or whatever, I think it's important to find your own voice. I mean, that's the idea, right? Absolutely. Either compositionally or stylistically but.
Yeah, I think that's true. Although, you know, there's also another thing. I think, I mean, I agree. You know, for what we do, that seems to be a basic thing. Is that if you're not doing your own thing, then what's the point? But then also, I think sometimes I think maybe it's possible to be a musician with a different mindset. Yeah, I started thinking about this because, you know, I have a friend who's just an unbelievably gifted instrumentalist. I mean, crazy ability, who just thought, actually, I don't want to play music. I'm just going to do something else. Still does music, but doesn't perform. Actually, two friends we'd done before. There's another guy actually who I'm thinking of. And then I thought, well, actually, you know, for people like us, you know, maybe music is everything. But then maybe you could just be just like you're an incredibly able linguist, and your linguistics friends are like, well, he could contribute to the field. Maybe there are people who are just happy, you know. You don't need to be an individual to enjoy playing it. So maybe there is this mindset too. And I find this interesting, that people can have these different perspectives on it. Yeah. You know, you could be a fantastically gifted musician and just enjoy sounding like whoever it would be, you know, Brad Meldau or whatever. You know, I don't know.
I have the same experience. Like one of my former students, I remember, you know, he then finished in Austria, the school and the guitar. Jazz and everything, and I was like, yeah, man, write your own music, check out this, I don't know, you know, check out Joe Morris, check out this stuff. And he was like, no, you know, and he really enjoys playing, I don't know, all the things you are, or, you know, Satin Doll or whatever. And it's like, then I figure out after a long time, okay, well, that's okay, as long as he has fun and he enjoys it, that's okay then.
Right,
you know?
Right. And it's difficult because music's something which gets so inside your head that it can be difficult to notice these other perspectives, but when you do, it's quite liberating, actually. Once you accept that, you know, people actually, there are still people who enjoy playing, like, you know, like you said, like Brett Meldau or whoever, like, I don't know, George Shearing. That's it. Okay. Absolutely.
But anyway, Alexander, I just want to go first to two albums that blew my mind lately. Like first is like the duo with Tomeka Reid, Shards and Constellations, and I just wanted to ask you, like, how did you sound so natural together, and how did that project happen? Like,
so Tomeka, I'd always been a huge fan of her playing. I think I first heard her maybe on some of in fact I did first hear her on some of Nicole Mitchell's things. And then we met. We first played. Taylor Ho Bynum put together a quintet. We had a residency at a festival in Portugal for 2 weeks a few years ago now, and it was beautiful, you know. And we would learn Taylor's music, and we performed at a festival. But we also sort of did some informal jam sessions with some students and stuff, and we'd just hang out together a lot. And so that's when we first got to play together. So that was really nice. And then, you know, we just sort of stayed in touch, had various ideas about doing things. And then when the opportunity came up, we did a few dates as a trio with Nicole.
Oh, wow, beautiful.
Which was so great. And just the way the dates on that tour worked, I can't remember. Nicole had to go back to the States or something, and Tomeka and I just stayed for a couple of extra days, and and made the duo record. And it was great because you know how this thing. One of the things that I find kind of magical about music is that you can have two, you know, very brilliant musicians. You know, I'm not saying we're that, but just generically speaking, you could have two very brilliant musicians, but the duo wouldn't necessarily be interesting. And that's kind of magical, you know, because however much we study and you listen and whatever, you know, there is some kind of chemistry, you know, is a real thing in music. But anyway, I feel like, we learnt to, we could sort of hear each other in a really nice way. And so that's how that came about. And, you know, sadly, we lost quite a few gigs.
I can imagine
this year, but so did everyone, I guess, is the thing. But so it came together through that, and we did have, you know, I had a handful of compositions to try, but over the tour, especially with Nicole, you know, we were improvising very compositionally, and it was one of those rare occasions on which I've thought, actually, I'm not sure I'm adding anything by having a composition here. And so, we free improvised for the most part. We had this couple of pieces from sort of the ASEM tradition. But that's how that came about. And it's a total joy to play with Tomeka. You know, she's one of these completely fearless improvisers. You know, can go in any direction, and I really admire people who can go in any direction but still sound only like themselves. That's that's kind of an amazing gift. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Beautiful stuff, because you know, I've checked out your music now, like in this last period. Like, you know, I listened a lot, especially to the solo piano record on Intec before already, and but you know, I dug into some other stuff I didn't know about you, and you've done so much duo work, man. Like, and I wanted to ask you, besides the duo with Tomeka, like you did an incredible duo that Leaps in Leicester. With Evan Parker, man. And, you know, Evan is like, well, you know, he's the founder of modern improvised jazz, or whatever this term is. Like, and first I want to ask you, like, how did you meet Evan in the beginning? Like, how was that story? I mean, you're both from the UK creative scene, but still, like.
I suppose I met him I must have met him at gigs around London a little bit, you know, at that time. So what that would have been 20, not quite 20, 15 years ago, maybe. There were not many places to play in London, or at least definitely not many with pianos, you know. So there was definitely a limited number of gigs that I would do. So so you would generally meet people, but we met, and I think I don't know how it came to be that we played. I mean, how it worked was that he has a residency at the Vortex club, and he plays every month. And so he emailed me once and asked if I would like to do it, and that first year we might have done 8 or 9, 10 of the gigs. You know, he was very good to me. He's very good to various young musicians. You know, he really if he thinks there's something productive musically, I suppose. And so the relationship started like that. He just invited me to lots of his monthly gigs at the Vortex, and we've sort of played lots in lots of different contexts over the years as a result. And he, for example, introduced me to Louis Moholo. Yeah, that was quite a nice story. How
did that happen? I mean, because I know you played with Louis a lot, and I love those bands, man.
Yeah. I mean, those bands are such a joy. How that happened was that there's this quartet with Louis, Evan, John Edwards, and Steve Beresford called Fox's Fox.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And one time Steve couldn't do the gig, and so Evan invited me. And what I remember was getting, you know, again, it was at the Vortex, and so, you know, kind of informal. You know, once you've played there a few times, you know the ropes, so you just turn up shortly before playing, say hello to everyone and go on stage. But I remember going on stage and Louis looking at me completely blankly, because he didn't realize it was going to be a quartet. So that he was there with John and Evan, and then when I sat down at the piano, he was just like, I thought we were playing trio. But we again, it was one of these relationships where we just musically it worked well. About a month later, I was in the audience at one of Louis's gigs, and he saw me there at half time in the break between sets, and invited me to play the second set with the band. And you know, I knew a lot of the tunes from the old record, and then a lot of them I didn't know. But then I thought, well, in a way, I'm crazy saying yes to this, but I'm even more crazy to say no. You know?
Of course.
And so really from that day, I played you know, regularly in Louis's bands. But yeah, so that's how it came about with Evan. You know, we've had the opportunity to play together in his quartets, in trio, duo. I've just written a sort of a large ensemble work which is coming out in January. Which
I wanted to ask you about that. Yeah, this Togetherness project, right?
Yeah.
What is that? How did this happen? Because I saw it's like you recorded actually in July or something this year.
Yes, it was sort of a miracle. We got this one window where it was allowed.
Yeah. Wow.
And this was beautiful. So 2 years ago, I had a commission from a fantastic contemporary classical ensemble here in the UK called the Riot Ensemble, and they wanted a piece. They were putting together a concert of two halves. They also invited the pianist Kit Downs to do a project with his trio, and the idea was to have the trio, his trio, play with the ensemble, and me to do something to feature Evan and myself playing with the ensemble. And so, and it was a nice concert actually. And so it took the form really of, I suppose, a concerto for two improvising soloists.
Oh, beautiful! Yeah.
And we just did two concerts with it, and it was really great. But I had that feeling, you know, when you do this sometimes after a gig, you're very happy with the music, but you think, but there was this direction, there was this direction, and you know, you I don't know, unless you're some kind of visionary, you don't notice that until you've done it.
Yeah, sure.
So actually so I always had in my mind to develop this project. And then in the early months of lockdown, I thought, well, actually, you know, this is a great opportunity to write. So I reworked the music. I became a little bit more specific about my role and Evan's role. You know, before we both had a score, but it was really for reference.
You kind of glided over.
Yeah, just to show the geography of the piece. And then I just opened up the piece from there. And so that's a real joy to hear Evan in composed contexts. I mean, because of course, he's one of the greatest improvisers there is, but he's also on some super interesting composed music. You know? I mean, you know, obviously whether it's Kenny, you know, whether music for
Kenny especially,
you know, with Kenny or with Brotherhood of Breath, or you know, Gavin Bryars. There's some really interesting stuff, and he's fantastic in these contexts. So so I'm actually really proud of how that music came out, and it's I'm sort of happy I took the time to do it, because I was happy with the music first time around, but second time I'm
looking forward to hear it. I mean, it's not out yet. It's coming out January, right?
January. Yeah.
Really looking forward to that one. To hear. Nice. But can I return just like you mentioned, like 15 years ago you met Evan, right? 15. Like how was that for you? Like you know, like I spoke with Peter Bernstein, you know, the guitarist in New York, how he played with Sonny Rollins, and you know, Peter. That was like 10 years ago, and Peter was by then like already like a hugely established guitarist, you know, playing with everyone. Yeah. And he still said like that the first rehearsal, like, you know, he was just like, what can I do or not? And then Sonny said to him like, just go. You know, you're here because you are who you are, and I want you to do that. And I wanted to ask you, like, how did you feel first playing with Evan? Like, since he's, I think, 2 generations older than you are, like, you know, or one. Well, but how was it for you, like, to improvise in the beginning?
I mean, that's very interesting what you say about Peter, because that experience that really resonates with me. I think I realized early on that you know, you listen to Evan's music and you can tell that he's uncompromising.
Yeah, exactly.
He's not interested in making it easy for anyone. Or that's not quite accurate, because, you know, maybe you could make very creative music and it could flow very nicely. So it's not that I suppose what he's not interested in is anybody making compromises.
Yeah, he wants to push the button.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And so I think that I went into it with this assumption that actually, if I didn't try to do my thing, then I felt that the quality, I assumed that was the quality that he wanted in me, you know, because, you know, if you're Evan, just like if you're Sonny Rollins, you can ask who you want.
Exactly.
And nobody's going to say no to that gig, right?
Yeah.
So I thought, well, maybe I just need to do my thing, and it's sort of sink or swim like that. And I think, and really, I think that's how it went. So yes, I was nervous because, you know, as young musicians, we're always, you need those opportunities, you know, and although we like to pretend that we're not, as musicians, we're also all music fans, and probably there's a little sentimental part of us too. So, you know, for me, it's a big deal. You know, I've sit and look at the shelves behind me, and there's a bunch of Evan Parker CDs. So it means something to me to get to play with him, you know. And so I went into it with that attitude that I had to try and do my thing, and I think that, you know, as with a lot of these elders, responded to that mindset. And so as a result, you know, of course he's aware that people are nervous to play with him in some respects, but so, you know, he's also a great person and will put you at ease. But in terms of musically what he wanted, I guess, you know, we found a nice common ground, and it worked like that. So it's interesting what you say about Peter. I can completely identify with. They put you at ease, and they make it clear that they've asked you for a reason. You know, and if he wants a different, you know, so for example, in Evan's electroacoustic ensemble, if the sound he wants is Agustí Fernández, he will ask Agustí. If he's hearing John Tilbury or Schlippenbach or Marilyn, you know, so all you can do is be yourself. I think is the thing.
I find that so interesting because, you know, I've played in many occasions. Like, you know, I played with Paul McCandless. From Oregon, and I was so nervous in the beginning. You know, and then you see how friendly they are and how actually like supportive in a way. And then it's like, okay, after the first something hour or gigs or whatever, you know, then you're like, okay, it's happening. Let me do my thing then, you know. So that's good. Exactly that. And that's beautiful.
So he's just having this degree of self-confidence, not in a bad way, but just
no, but like you said, we're music fans as well, and I love that what you said, because, you know, I think that's important to realize that, you know, you do this because you also love music. So if you can actually play with people who created history basically before you, I think that's amazing, right? So,
absolutely. And you know, there's something very humbling as well about these. I love this. You know, it's exactly the same with Braxton or with Wadada. You know, these people. There's something humbling about the fact that here we are, you know, the younger generation, and, you know, there's of course there are people innovating, people of our age and younger innovating. But actually, you look at this generation, and they're the most relentless, merciless improvisers and innovators there are, and that's something, you know. So it keeps you, it makes you work harder. You know. So it's it's a beautiful, you know, dynamic. Really,
I love that, the connection of generations. You know, because that's what jazz was in a way all about from the beginning, right? You know, like Miles brought Tony Williams, or when he was I don't know 16 or 17, or Herbie and all these guys, and it's good that this is happening in improvised music as well, because that's how we learn, right?
Absolutely, completely.
But Alexander, you mentioned Braxton now, and I saw you played, like, I saw that footage at Schlachtholz in Wels. You actually played in his quartet, and I want to ask, you know, I've been a huge fan of Braxton, of course, for such a long time. And how did this collaboration happen, or like?
So I suppose the first window into that world I had was Yeah, of course. You know, like so many of us, I grew up listening to a lot of Anthony's music. And in 2004, he performed at the Royal Festival Hall in London with, well, it was a group of his students. And those students happened to be Mary Halverson, Satoshi Takeshi on drums, Chris Dahlgren, actually, who I think is a little bit older, and Taylor Ho Bynum. And it was funny because to British audiences at that time, you know, Mary and Taylor were totally unknown quantities. But that gig blew my mind. Taylor actually, it was a way, you know, I'd grown up, especially listening from a very young age, listening to, say, early Ellington and stuff. So my instinct, my musical instinct was always to be looking at the kind of cutting edge things, at the vanguard of things. But I loved this old music so much, and hearing Taylor was like the Rosetta Stone. It helped me understand, because here you could hear all those old Ellington trumpet players. You could hear Bubba Miley. You could hear Cootie Williams. You could hear the old tradition, and how, but just like with somebody like Lester Bowie, just how he'd galvanized that and assimilated it into his own thing. Anyway, so moved forward a few months, and I was on holiday in New York. I decided to go to New York for a week that Christmas, and Cecil Taylor's big band was playing at the Iridium. So I went to one of the shows there, and sure enough, Taylor was in the audience, and in the band, I should say.
The band,
and so we got talking. You know, I told him, you know, how much I loved that gig and this, that, and the other, and actually that was also how the Convergence Quartet partly came together.
Okay.
But so I became friends with Taylor at that time, and we were always in touch, and he was very generous in helping me understand Braxton's music too, and so forth. And then moved forward to 2015, and they performed the Sonic Genome in Torino, and the Genome being one of the big kind of master organizing devices in Braxton's music. And I think at fairly short notice, one of the 12 plus 3 tet, I think it was at that point, which in the Genome has quite a significant role, because that's the core group which organizes the subgroupings. So you do need to understand the processes to an extent. One of them couldn't travel from the States, and so Taylor called me and said, you know, you understand a little bit of what's going on, and it is only a little bit, but whatever. And would you be up for it? And of course, you know, I loved it, you know, and so that's where I first performed with Anthony, and we met then. Maybe we'd actually met previously when he was on tour with Taylor at some point, but that's when we first played. And then actually the Genome was performed again last year in Berlin. But at some point last year, Anthony had decided that he wanted to revisit standards. It's something that he decides to do every say 10 years or so. And he his agents just wrote me a message and said, you know, would I be interested? You know, Anthony had, I'm not sure if we talked about standards at some point, but Anthony had said, you know, would I be interested? And of course, you know, So they came together like that, and we sort of put together the group from that starting point. And and we had this unbelievable tour, really, a couple of days of rehearsal, and then three-night residencies. We did 3 nights in Warsaw, 3 nights in London, and 3 in Wels. And it was just such a joy. I mean, it was amazing.
Especially to play in a smaller group, right?
Just to hear to learn from him musically, just to hang out with him. You know, he's one of life's very special people. Like, totally,
how is he like a band leader? I mean, like how was he like, or is he? I mean,
it has this kind of almost, it's one of the things that I aspire to as a band leader, I think, which is that I think it's very Ellingtonian. Okay, so if you listen to the Ellington band, it's probably the most instantly identifiable, definitely one of the most instantly identifiable ensembles in the history. It couldn't be anyone else. So it's the most Ellington thing in the world is Ellington's big band. And yet, if you listen to Cootie Williams never sounds more like Cootie Williams than when he plays in Ellington.
Yeah.
Paul Gonsalves, you know, there are some great records outside Ellington, but he sounds the most like Paul Gonsalves in Ellington. And then I'm thinking, you know, band leading, just because you assert your personality doesn't mean that other people have to compromise. Yeah. You know, you can have these beautiful things where everybody does their own thing. And I realized that actually that's what I'd learned when I heard Mary and Taylor play with him in 2004. Taylor was absolutely doing his thing and yet sounding very clearly like he was playing Braxton music. And so what I would say about how is he as a band leader is he has this unbelievable gift to give everybody complete freedom to do exactly what they want. And yet you're in a context where you're playing his music, it's his vision. And that's really quite magical. So it's a joy. It was absolutely humbling. You know, you know, in a context like that, your just ears are open. You're just learning and enjoying it. And yet you realize that actually his genius it's the same for him. He's there listening to every single thing you do. And it's very humbling because, you know, for us, he's an icon of the music, but he's a bigger student than any of us. And so, so it was a really magical few days, and he was very generous with anything really, musical expertise. We would talk about musical things. Sometimes it would just be the kind of the jazz fan thing. It's like, you know, we'd say he would talk to us about when he lived with Wilbur Ware, or when he lived with Ornette, or
that's incredible.
Yeah, and so
I love that.
yeah, it's incredible. So the conversation would or he'd tell us about the first time he heard Coltrane, or all these things, and so yeah, it was just quite an experience, and just. He's also just a magician musically. One of the things I respect is that I think certain musicians at that level don't take risks. Not really. They have a repertoire of risks that they're prepared to take.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
Whereas he will absolutely run the risk of something being. He'll take the risk of something being imperfect if it gives him the chance of it being absolutely magical.
Yeah.
And that I really respect. That's actually something also that Louis Moholo has. The only way you could let down the audience would be not to take the chance. Yeah. You know, that's the only cowardly thing you can do on the stage. And if you take a chance and it doesn't work, well, you didn't know if you didn't try.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, I wanted to ask you about that, like, especially playing with Anthony or with all these, you know, with Evan or all these amazing improvisers, Han Benink or Hamid, or you played with so many amazing guys. And like, you know, I spoke with many guys now doing this series about improvisation, because I'm really curious also, not as a musician, but as like this outsider listening to that, like about improv and taking chances. And I clearly remember what Tom Rainey, the drummer, said, like, and I asked him, you know, I played with Tom a little, and I was always shocked. I was still younger then, and I sometimes didn't get it because, you know, he's one of my heroes, and I was afraid maybe to go somewhere. But, you know, he could take the snare drum and play it for 1 minute or with determination. And And I wanted to ask you, like, how do you or all these guys you play with, or especially you, improvise an idea? Let's say the tune Shimmy with Evan, which is like 32 minutes long improv. And how do you follow an idea and not to be afraid of jumping into water, or stick with that idea? Like, if you know what I mean, if you can.
I do, yeah. That's a really interesting question.
I mean, fear, like this stupid word, is one factor, which I guess it doesn't exist. It exists only here. But look, can you play a minor second just for 1 minute?
Yeah.
Or not? What is allowed? Or
Yeah, and it becomes very interesting because we've all seen it. It's very clear when a musician is trying to be rebellious, and that there's nothing more conservative, is there, than watching somebody try to be crazy.
Yeah, that's the worst.
So it's it's interesting. I don't really know. I think part of it is this is a very interesting issue.
But because for me as a player, I'm like, sometimes you're in the zone or in the moment. Yeah. I spoke to Hal Galper, the piano player.
Oh, yeah.
And he speaks about the zone.
Yeah.
And he says he's just there and he's playing. And I think that's the best when you're improvising. Yeah. But sometimes, you're not there always. So you kind of have to think and, how to make a choice. That's what I'm thinking about right now in improv.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I think probably part of my difficulty answering the question is to do with this idea of the zone, is to do with flow states and these things. I mean, for me, for sure, part of, again, maybe it's part of background with classical music as well. Part of, I love to practice. I'm an obsessive practicer.
Oh, really?
In fact, the fact, look at where my computer is. My computer is positioned.
Okay.
Piano. But and so I think for me, the hours of practice are to get your conscious technique to a place whereby you can get as quickly as possible in performance to the place where you're not thinking.
Yeah.
And so I think that partly explains why it's difficult to understand, to analyze those moments in an improvisation. Another issue that I had was that and again, it's sort of a kind of a classical music thing, but I used to be very kind of, I used to struggle with being obsessive compulsive with practicing. And so I would practice something, and if I got it wrong, I would have to repeat it 3 times, and multiples of 3 was my problem. Then up to 9, and so on. And then so I thought, and this gives you quite a degree of control. It's terrible, and it can be kind of embarrassing as well in public when this happens. But in terms of practicing your instrument, actually, it's kind of great.
Yeah.
It's like if I'm learning some Beethoven or some Chopin with one of my students, this is what I'm trying to get them to do. Is like we do it again. Yeah. Change something if it needs to, but repeated actions, because it gives you control. But then too much control can be happening. And at some point, I had to learn to try to embrace the chaos, in the unknown things. So, sometimes it would be consciously altering your technique so that you can't guarantee that you're going to play runs correctly. And of course, there's also plenty of stuff that I just haven't studied, so I'm not as proficient in it. So there's that issue too. Having said that, of course, there are certain improvisers where just the incredible control is part of the emotional engagement with the music. I mean, if I think of, for example, I mean, in a creative music context, if I think of somebody like Steve Lehman, he exhibits incredible control over his materials, and actually, that's part of the intensity of the performance. Maybe going back, that's a little bit like you hear with some Joe Henderson or Freddie Hubbard, in the 60s, when they're just shredding so hard, some easy chords and they're just going in. That's just the control, is kind of so there are other ways to do it, but for me, a little bit of raggedness. Once I got over this kind of thing of being quite obsessive compulsive about practice, and strangely, it's not something I got help with. It just one day I didn't struggle so much. Once I got over that control thing, that helped. But yeah, that kind of unconscious thing I don't know. This is a very diffuse answer. If this was an improvisation, I would be unimpressed because it would be lacking clarity.
No, but it makes sense. It's hard to answer. It's just like for me, you listen to great improvisers, or to you as well. Like your records, you seem to always go into different places. Let's say also your solo records, which I find sometimes, maybe piano is different, but on guitar, frightening. I've done solo gigs like in the last few years, and in the beginning it was just shit. What can I do or what can't I do? And it's just this idea of improvising. Then you have someone like Derek Bailey who completely says like, okay, fuck it all, and I have a certain framework, but still I'll do anything. And I'm just curious how you
and also it depends on the context as well. So for example, with somebody like Han Benning, the duo, for example, it's very different, for example, playing with Han than with, say, Evan, because with Han there's almost a performative aspect. For me, for example, it flows in a very different way. I'm far more conscious playing with Han than I am, say, with a lot of other people, because everything is to do, not everything, but a lot of what he is doing, for example, is to do with disruption. So then you begin to think in a different way, because you think, well, should I disrupt as well? And then you think, well, hang on, disrupting is what he practices. And so if you try and disrupt, that's exactly what he wants from you. And so that's interesting, and then you watch the people who really played brilliantly with Han. You watch Misha Mengelberg, or the dynamics there are just insane.
Michael Moore and that trio, the Clouzon,
fantastic band, So it very much depends who you're playing with. I think with those sort of those obtuse moments, how they come out.
Also, how you improvise, I guess, then, and everything.
I mean, for example, I've never played with Roscoe Mitchell, but I imagine there are very interesting parallels between playing with Roscoe and Han. I mean, they sound totally different, but both have this sort of single-minded approach. So it would be very interesting to. Somebody who'd done both things, because the dynamics of the particular situation, I think, affects.
It would be interesting to find musicians who played with Han and Roscoe, actually.
I mean, there must be. I mean, of course, Evan would be one.
Exactly. Exactly.
Braxton, but sure. I mean, it's very
interesting. Mentioned the duo, and idea of writing for writing for musicians. That's why the musicians who were in his band excelled and still served Duke's music. And I wanted to ask you if this is also something you do as a composer when you compose, that that you have in mind, let's say for Convergence Quartet, or that Taylor is going to play that stuff, or do you just write stuff when you write stuff? Or
I always would have said that I write for the person. And I like to think that I do write for the person. And of course, sometimes, I very explicitly write for the person. If, for example, it's a trio, something where I play with the guys a lot, you have in your mind the type of thing that somebody might do with material. But I have thought about this quite a lot recently, because I think that on these occasions where somebody else has to step into a gig and they play music that I thought I'd written for someone else, they also do it amazingly, and they don't sound like they're trying to be something that they're not. And so, I find this interesting, because
that's a good point, actually.
So, for example, so I don't know is the answer. I mean, instinctively, because I like the idea of things being distinctive, and I want to say I always write for the individual. But in practice, that, maybe that's not always, maybe some of that's in my head.
Maybe.
I mean, of course, there are, you can think of examples where it just wouldn't make sense, or you'd be missing the points to just write a generic part for somebody. But it's difficult, and I also think that it can feed together. It can come at various stages in the process. So obviously, putting the personnel of the group is one major compositional decision.
That's true.
And so potentially you could have a generic songbook, or it's what we do when we play standards, for example. You just have the songbook, and you're still sort of writing for the person in a sense, in the way that you curate that group and bring that group together. So it's an interesting question. Often, for example, in the first movement of this music that I wrote for Evan, this large ensemble music, it very clearly is built out of Evan's solo soprano saxophone language. And would it make sense for another saxophone player to play that movement? Not really, because the way that the written music responds, the instructions in the score, and the way that the written parts need to respond to the soloist, it just wouldn't quite make sense with most other saxophone players. So sometimes it is very specific, but other times no. I don't.
No, this makes sense what you're saying.
Yeah.
I never thought about it that way, because I like asking this question to musicians, but now that you turned it around, it kind of blew my mind. Like what you said, I never thought. Then of course you song with a different. Maybe it's even better than in the original version for whom you wrote it, let's say, or you thought you wrote it. So interesting.
Or they just find another angle. They find another direction. So it's an interesting set of questions for sure.
But speaking of this, I mean, not to take too much of your time, Alexander.
No.
I'm just curious, like, you being a band leader, or like, okay, you've done lots of collabs. I will touch those two as well. I mean, but What do you prefer? Like, I mean, that's a tough question, but okay, being a sideman or band leader, being a band leader, of course, takes certain responsibility as taking care of everything else beside the music also.
Yeah,
but
sure.
how do you put on the scale these two things?
This is a really interesting question. And this is something I'm thinking about a lot at this point, because I'm very lucky. I think, part of it's because I'm a piano player, and maybe because there aren't very many pianos, there aren't as many piano players. So one of the things is that I'm extremely lucky with the range of people that I get to play with, and especially the older generations.
Yeah.
I'm very, very aware of how fortunate I've been with these people that I get to play with, and it's a huge learning curve playing with all these people. And so I'm like a sponge, however say increasingly confident I might become in my own band leading, I guess part of that confidence is knowing how much I can learn from other people still.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it feels like there is also a point at which our generation needs to turn into the band leaders, needs to take direction and give direction. And so it is something I think about. I mean, it's a total joy. With Evan, Anthony, Lewis, all these people, I love it. And I like to play duo as well, because that has a particular type of relationship.
Yeah.
But ultimately, being a band leader is important to me, because that and being a soloist, I suppose, are the two. That's where you really get to assert your identity as a composer. And so because I'm interested in being a composer performer, I like to write as well. I think ultimately being a band leader is hugely important to me, because that's where that's the arena in which I can do that, and in which I can try to shape the whole. Of course, you can bring a composition to a collaboration, and that's fantastic too.
Yeah.
But when you're a leader, you can kind of shape more of the universe that day, and that's kind of nice. So it's interesting. I don't really know. I suppose ultimately being a band leader and a soloist is the most important to me. Except that I'm so unbelievably fortunate with these collaborations. I don't know how I would feel if I didn't get to play with these generations of people. And then also, as you say, I do a lot of duos, and that is a situation I really value, because that's
a different animal.
It really is, and I do love to play a duo. And having said all this about older generations, I feel like one of the things that I'm getting better at is just learning from students. Of course, we all know our peers, our friends who have amazing things, and you kind of learn from them just because you hang out with them.
Yeah.
But just there's so much to learn from everyone.
Yeah.
So it's a balance, isn't it? You need to keep the information coming in, but then ultimately focus it into your own thing.
Yeah. No, beautiful answer. Like, what you said. Well, I just want to ask you, like, I mean, playing duo is like, it's not being given a side person or a leader. It's like a different thing. Yeah. But like Quartet and Decoy, like these are like collab bands, right? Kind of. Yeah, right. And they're still both active in a way, or?
I mean, I suppose less so the Convergence Quartet, just because I suppose with that band, Dom Lash, the bass player, he everybody finds their own musical direction, and he began to move he would still sound fantastic in that band, but he began to move in a certain direction. Mm-hmm. I think we all began to develop other things
Yeah.
And it would be what would be really interesting would be to play with that band again. I'm not sure when we last did it, actually. I'm trying to think, but it would be very interesting because the music, I think that lineup would still be incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
But I think the music would be very different than than previously. So that would be very interesting. So that's probably less active. Decoy is active. I mean, it's one of those things which naturally we don't play that much, just because a Hammond organ on the back line is kind of.
I wanted to ask you that.
Complex.
Yeah, like, because you've done AC/DC. That's the new record, right?
Yeah.
I listened to it, and it's almost like groovy. Soulful. I mean, it's okay. Joe McPhee adds his touch there but it's like groovy, soulful almost. But I wanted to ask you, how did you happen to play the B3 on within that project?
Because
interesting.
So the organ. So when I was playing classical music, I played the organ, church organ. Around playing the organ because obviously they behave in very different ways to a piano, in terms of touch and so on.
Yeah.
So I have a background playing the organ, and although on a B3 the registration works a different way, the principles are the same with mixing harmonics and stuff. Now, how it came about was Steve, the drummer. There was a record label, Bow Weevil, who they wanted to do a record. I think the guy wanted to do a Hammond record. This was back 10 more years ago. And said to Steve Noble, because he used to work a lot, have you got any ideas? And Steve knew that I played, and so Steve sort of put it together.
Okay.
And it came together that way. And strangely, it's with a couple of very minor exceptions, it's the only band, I say minor, just as in not they're musically less important, but just that I very, very rarely do them. With a couple of exceptions, it's the only band I play Hammond in.
Yeah.
And the groove thing is interesting because John Edwards, he and I actually play together a lot with Mulatu. And so actually, even though that band is kind of anarchic and maybe it grooves in that, it's more like those kind of open, loose grooves of, I don't know, Lifetime or that kind of, John and I do actually play in a band where we just play pocket, we just,
oh, wow,
we just groove.
Amazing.
So we do, we do have that relationship a bit. And the music just on that occasion, it just went in that direction. And of course, you think of Joe's background, Nation Time and these records.
Yeah.
So I guess it was all in there somewhere. But it's a fun band, and Joe is just a force of nature, really.
So how did you get him invited to Decoy, like as a guest? I mean, like featured.
I can't remember how it. Oh no! I tell you how it happened. I think is that he had done a trio performance with John Edwards and Steve Noble in Newcastle, and they'd got on very well. And one of them, I'm not sure who, suggested adding me. I think Joe had a residency in London.
Oh, okay.
And it just the chemistry was just really good from the start, and Joe really enjoyed it, and we all did, and it's a nice project to have because obviously we're all very busy, and we play maybe we play once a year, but that's fine. Everyone's happy with that, and we pick up where we left off, and it's fun. It's feels like it's very much a live band. It's one of those things.
Yeah, it sounds like a fun band. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah. You need to be. Well, you don't need to be in the room with it, but it's to do with a lot of it is vibe and energy, and that's how it came about. And Joe as well, sort of grew up listening to a lot of these, you know, he and I just spend hours talking about Jimmy Smith or whatever.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I love this stuff. You know, all those Blue Note organ records. I love that stuff.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
You know, Babyface Willette is my favorite.
Yeah.
But yeah, anything, you know,
Grant
anything.
Green, right?
Oh man, anything with the Grant Green, Ben Dixon, John Patton rhythms.
I love Grant Green. I was
Oh.
obsessed. Like for some period, I think I transcribed like 30 or 40 solos.
Oh
Like
yeah,
really.
That's amazing.
single line playing. Well, anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's about that thing in improvising and just playing the same thing. I mean,
Oh yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think my favorite Grant Green record is probably "Feeling the Spirit." Actually.
Yeah.
Which actually is probably my favorite Herbie Hancock anywhere on record as well. You know, seems like an unusual choice, but that might be my favorite Herbie.
Okay.
But I love Grant.
Grant
Green.
was incredible player.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Beautiful stuff, man. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Alexander, for sharing all this stuff.
No, not at all. No, it's great to chat.
Dr. Jazz. Dr. Jazz.